Dobrodošli u Feel Purple podcast, gdje je povezivanje sa sobom sinonim za povezivanje sa inspiracijom, kreativnošću i jednom dubljom, možda neko vrijeme skrivenom verzijom sebe. Moje ime je Marija i s vama dijelim priče na temu wellnessa, osobnog rasta i razvoja, istraživanja života i naše uloge u njemu. Ljubičast, odnosno purple, nije samo boja. Ona je simbol transformacije i osnaživanja. I baš poput učinka boje purple, cilj ovog podcasta je obogatiti tvoj život kroz razgovore koje dijelimo. Želim ti da se sjećaš purple. Uživaj! Hello to everyone and welcome to another episode of Feel Purple, where we explore different avenues to growth and expansion. Today I have such a wonderful guest and a person very dear to my heart with whom we will dig deeper into the topic of human design, precisely projectors, which I refer to as something that has changed my life, or at least really helped me figure out some things about myself. Please welcome Human Design Projector Expert, Nadia Gabrielle, who will share her wisdom and knowledge on this topic. She's also the name or face behind super fun Instagram account called Projectors Invited, which is hilarious, especially when you learn and know about projectors. I hope you will enjoy this episode as much as I did. Here we go.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you so very much. I have to welcome you today into Winter Wonderland. It's snowing today in Zagreb, and whenever I peek throughout the window, all I see is magic. So I'm happy you're joining me today.
I'm very happy to be here.
I have to tell you something before we start. It has been exactly 1 year since I have discovered you, and there is actually a whole story about it. Would you mind?
Tell me. Of course.
So 1 year ago, I was in the Azores. I was doing research and scouting locations for one of the retreats I was organizing at the time for a client over there. And I was there for about a month. And the very last night, I was attending a dinner party. And I met a person who, throughout the conversation, shared that he was a human design expert. And I didn't know about the term, I'm going to use the word term here, term human design, as my friends were mentioning it to me before, but I guess it never really sparked so much interest before. And now I was in the Azores, I was attending this dinner party, and throughout the conversation, a person asked me if I knew about it. And he asked me if I knew what design I was. I did not know the answer, and we did the chart right there. And I discovered I was a projector, and it resonated with me so much. So I got bits and pieces of the information about what human design was and what projector was, which was literally enough for me to put me on fire. And then fast forward to actually a few days later, when I came back to Zagreb, I became obsessed with it. But for some reason, I could not reach this person anymore to find out more firsthand. So I Googled like crazy and I started listening to podcasts. And this is where your name was popping up the most. And honestly, Nadia, all the information you shared, mostly about projectors, obviously this is your expertise and I'm a projector myself, I literally felt like I was diagnosed for life. And I'm not even kidding. I remember I was so thrilled. I was calling my friends to tell them this big news about my life because I felt like I felt a huge relief. So really, thank you so much. And I'm so humbled and honored to have you here today to talk broadly about what this is. And I really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Oh, thank you. That was lovely to hear. I'm so glad it's been helpful and that the system has provided you with so much understanding.
Absolutely.
I'm really happy.
Absolutely. So to start the episode, I would love to hear more of your background and would love to hear your story, actually. How did you discover human design leading to your practices today?
You gave a pretty good overview of my background with my two areas of expertise that are business and tech, and the more strategic side of things, which is where I have my degree, where I have tons of experience, but then also I'm a little hippie who like left to go to India when I was 19 or 20 and I wanted to, I mean, I'd been practicing yoga before, but I wanted to study more and that led me around the world and eventually led me to teach yoga and find my other teachers, my subconscious teachers, and study with them in India and Bali. And then I was hosting yoga retreats myself, like yoga and breathwork retreats in exotic locales around the world. I say it now and it feels like a different world, you know, a different life almost, because my life now is very different, but I'm very thankful that I got the chance in my early 20s to have such an adventure filled existence for a few
Wow.
years. And a little later, human design came into my life, and I didn't have that in that like you described it, that in that spark that came right away. That was like, oh my God, I need to, you know, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really have that. I also don't remember it that well, but um, I know that I don't know. You know, I think it depends on the individual's conditioning, how much they're gonna see themselves in their design. So if you've been conditioned away from your design and from what you were truly designed to be quite a lot, there's sometimes a little bit of a lag time between you discovering the system and it making sense to you, or it giving you that kind of recognition factor where you're like, oh yes, that is me. And I think that was the case a little bit with me because I was raised in a family of energy types, which we can dive into what that is for your audience if they're not quite sure yet. Um, but yeah, so I think for my entire life was under the impression that I was one of them, that I had a defined sacral. Of course, I didn't have these terms to describe it, but that's how I'd been living. So when I heard about being a projector, I was like, huh, that's interesting. But then I kept sort of pulling it aside and then over time, as I got to know myself better and as I also made some changes in my life and explored some of these principles and these concepts as they're meant to be explored, right? What we say in the human design world is it is an experiment. It started making more and more sense to me. So, you know, we can dive into a couple of ways that that happened maybe later on.
Exactly. And I would love you actually to provide a brief introduction to what human design is. And I
Yeah.
know you are a projector just like myself. I would love to hear your perspective on that. But if you could highlight the differences among various designs and profiles, like
Mhm.
what are the design types here?
Yeah. Well, I can always, you know, speak from my own experience and sort of my own lens. So the way that I use it, it's a system that gives you deeper insight into who you were originally designed to be. So before all the conditioning, all the outside voices, all the opinions, all the role modeling you've received, all of the associations you've made, all of your coping strategies and your protective mechanisms, all of that, if you just imagine visually removing all that those layers and just putting those away, what's underneath? Um, and I just think how wonderful to have that. How wonderful to have that because it's really hard to get a sense of that without that little, it's almost like a little treasure map, a little cheat sheet, right? So
Mhm.
that's how I use it. Um, and then there's 4 different auras that we distinguish between in human design. So there's the generator aura, which also comprises the manifesting generator, and those make up 70% of the population. And then there's a manifester, there's reflectors, and there's projectors. And I really like to distinguish them by aura because, as you probably know by now, and some people might know, I think aura is what it all comes down to. And I'll speak probably a lot about it today. So even just visually, right? Sometimes you don't even need to have so much intellectual understanding, but if you can visually see or imagine the actual auras of the aura types, that already gives you understanding. To me, it's kind of like, I don't know if you're into the tarot, Maria.
Not so much. I mean,
Okay.
I'm open to learn more about it, of course.
So it's interesting because with the tarot cards, I obviously am a little Sicilian witch and have been doing the tarot for a long time. In
Mhm.
fact, I went with my mom when I was like 5 or 6, and she did a course, and I was just, I suppose, hanging out as one does. But the similarity that I'm drawing between the tarot and and human design is that when you look at the original tarot cards, even if you have not an ounce of understanding of what they're all about, if you just look at them visually and you start interpreting it, the meaning will come to you. It will crystallize itself. Like you will see, oh, what is this person's body language? What are the colors? How are the colors of this card different than the colors of this card? And you kind of come to an intuitive understanding. That's how I love to use it. So with human design, I think it's similar with the aura. So if we just look, and you guys can just Google like human design auras, and there's going to be on Google image search a picture that pops up that gives you that visual. But if we just want to go through them briefly, the 4 auras, starting with the manifesting generator and the generator aura, we call those big and enveloping. So if you imagine a person, you kind of have this big sort of cloud-like sort of, I imagine it to be like squishy, inviting, like there's no hard edges. You kind of just walk in, there's space, you can sort of enter it from any point type aura, right? And that's what these types are like.
Mm.
Then we've got the manifestor aura, which is kind of the opposite, on the opposite spectrum, which is a little bit smaller. It's a little bit tighter. In the human design vernacular, we call it repelling, which sometimes, um, you know, you have to come to terms with whether you want to use that word or not, or what that word means to you and the associations you have with it. If you can just use it objectively, great. But the manifest aura, that's not a person that you just easily approach and you're just like, oh, here I am, just sort of dropping yourself on their couch. That's not how that's going to be, because their aura is very much, it's tight. Like they're going to be more discerning that way.
Mm.
Then we've got the projector aura, which is, I like to say it's shaped like an arrow, but in reality it's just a triangle. So it has, different from the generator and the manifesting generator auras, it has that sort of focal point. And usually that focal point goes outside. So if we think of the shape of an arrow or a triangle, the projector is highly focused on the thing that's opposite them. So usually it's another person. And then they're going to hyper focus on that, but it can also be a topic, a rabbit hole that they're in at the moment. And all that energy, right? If you think of a triangle, the energy, there's kind of like the broad side of the triangle, and then there's the focal side where it all culminates in one point. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's where the visual is so strong that you do not even need to understand anything about this. But if you understand this, you already have an idea of what the projector type is all about, because that energy landing on someone else is going to be real strong.
For
And
sure.
really specific and very impactful. So we need to wield that energy with a little bit of restraint and with a little bit of understanding of that impact. Because if we're just kind of directing it wherever we wish without necessarily that being wanted from the other side, then that can backfire. And we can talk about that later.
Mm.
And then we've got the fourth one, which is the reflector aura, and that's the smallest percentage in the population. And their aura is kind of where all the others have specific shapes. So we have like the small circle, the big circle, we have the triangle. And then the reflector aura is kind of like, that, I don't know if you're probably too young for this, but when we were young, my generation, we had what was it, Microsoft Paint. Do you know that? Do you remember that?
Yes, of course.
Yes, okay. The little paint tool on Microsoft Paint, it's kind of like it didn't give you like a brush stroke or a pencil stroke. It just gave you like paint that's dispersed all over. And this is very specific. People are like, you lost us at Microsoft Paint.
I'm
okay.
trying to remember all the details over there.
Oh, it's fine. So that's kind of what the reflector aura is. It's kind of more a little bit dispersed. It's like a little bit, it doesn't have a shape. It's more like a big cloud, but it doesn't have that shape. And that is an aura that we refer to as sampling. So that's an aura that almost in my visualization of it, it sort of shape shifts a little bit. It goes over there, it samples a little bit over here, then it draws itself back in, then it goes over here. And that's how the reflector is meant to live. So I hope that that little overview for someone who's super new, or even just as a refresher for someone who's more seasoned, was helpful.
So basically, the way anyone finds out about their design is through a chart generated online, right? So based on your date and time of birth, I will add the link in the description box of this episode. So whoever wants to find out about their own design, they can do so. As a projector myself, I will go back on the aura a little bit more in details with some questions. But as a projector myself, I will be going to be selfish enough to put a spotlight on us. I would love to delve deeper on that aspect. Can you explain like the entire life direction of projectors? And maybe it is a silly question, but I'm honestly wondering, are we born like that or do we become like that at some point, like projectors or any type of design? And what is going on here? So please,
Mhm.
let's keep it here on projectors because I will have some more detailed questions on that.
Love that. So I'd say the life trajectory, it's hard to kind of generalize because we are going to be, it's a large part or large-ish part of the population. So, different people, different lives. It's kind of like with yoga. If you're familiar, my teacher always says, hey, how many different yoga styles do you think exist? And the answer is as many as there are teachers, as many as there are practitioners. Like there's always going to be a different flavor. But if I were to generalize it, I would summarize it as the life direction being one that is takes you from bitterness to success, which is the projector's not self theme, which is just a human design term for this is what we're experiencing when we're not clicked in, when we're not acting as ourselves, when we're finding ourselves in a wrong environment, when we're finding ourselves in wrong dynamics. For us, it's going to be bitterness. For some of the other auras that I've just touched on before, it's going to be different things. And I find that even if people don't resonate with much of their chart in the beginning, the bitterness, like that, that like, oh, that feeling that's so terrible, people are usually like, oh God, that I know. Like that, yeah, I've had that before. And so that way you can sort of use it as a little, a little like a signpost of,
Right.
okay, time to pay a little bit of attention because you're veering really, really far into that bitter territory. And it's not nice, right? It's not fun to be there.
As someone whose company is named Purple Aura, this is one of my favorite words and parts being
Yes.
mentioned within human design. Are there any kind of tools or advices you can give us to keep our aura as clean, as bright, as purple as possible?
Yes, Maria, have you watched that movie Almost Famous?
Should I put it on my list?
Yes, please put it on your list. It just popped into my mind now. It's such a good, it's one of my favorite movies. I think early aughts, if not year 2000, Cameron Crowe, really good. It's about um rock stars. It's about like rock stars in the early 70s. And there's just, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there's this scene where I'm pretty sure they're all like high on some drugs. And one of the main characters is on the phone to his mom, but there's this girl who's really high talking next to him. And she keeps saying, like, your aura is purple. And he's
Ah!
just like talking to his mom, and he's like, Mom, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. It's really loud. And his mom keeps talking to him. And this girl just keeps saying, No, I'm saying your aura is purple. And he's like, No, Ma, I can't hear you. And she's like, No, your aura is purple. You'll have to watch it. It's recommended watching for you specifically. Then back to your actual question. Yeah, so as I said before, right, the projector aura is highly focused. Um, so what that means for us is that we have to just be so aware of the way that we use it, because we can find ourselves, it's our life force that we're focusing in a certain direction. So if we're focusing that in the wrong direction towards the wrong person being someone who doesn't want it, someone who's not going to appreciate it, someone who never asked for it, or the wrong situation or the wrong sort of field, then just imagine how you're depleting yourself, focusing all that attention, focusing all your gifts, focusing all your brilliance in a direction through that arrow, like as we said, right? And imagine it like a little watering can, like you would water your plants, and you keep giving that water out somewhere that doesn't need that water. It's already been watered, or it's just like concrete, it doesn't need water. It's repelling, what you're giving out, like that is going to lead to bitterness. That's the kind of dynamic that you want to be wary of and that you want to make sure you avoid. So that's why I always come back with all my teachings, all my projector teachings, always want to touch on aura, because none of the other parts of the chart, for me at least, are going to be helpful or as helpful as they can be if we don't get these aura dynamics right. It's so incredibly important. So just being discerning, being aware, being mindful. And again, as I said before, showing a little bit of restraint, because sometimes it's also a matter of, we know that this is not great, but we want it to happen so badly. Do you know that feeling?
Yes, and honestly, it's almost as I'm hearing, and this is how I felt throughout my life. It's almost like too extreme. My aura, now I'm understanding that it's all about aura. It was either exhausting me or was putting me on fire. So
Yeah,
we're talking about literally two extremes.
exactly. And it's nice because I think that's also where the system shines, and it gives you a little bit of, it gives you your power back, where it's less, oh, this is happening to me and this is so terrible. And it's more, oh, well, if this is depleting me, if this is not working, if this is not helpful, then let me, right? Like suck that back in, or like suck that life force back in and direct it somewhere else, or keep it inside for a moment and wait until something worthwhile shows up. I think it gives you more agency, and I like that.
Do other types of human design as well have some challenges, either within their auras or any other kind of challenges, or is it only us projectors?
No, it's every single type. It's kind of like, with hair, how people always want, they're like, oh God, my hair is so straight, I can't do anything. And the person with curly hair is like, oh, but mine is so curly, I can't ever. It's the same way with the auras. It's like, oh, but my aura is this way. I work with all types, and I can tell you they all come with their own cross to bear is not a really nice way to phrase it, but for for lack of a better term, and I work with a lot of manifestors. I really enjoy the manifestor aura, and I kind of, they come, I mean, I work with mostly projectors, I would say, I don't know, maybe 70% at this point, one-on-one. But then I think the next group would be manifestors. I don't know. I don't have the stats in my mind right now, but it's quite a few manifestors. And they come, right? They have a really powerful aura. Remember how we said it? It's like
Mhm.
um the aura that's powered, that's designed to power through, that's designed to initiate, that's designed to drive initiative. And they come with their own stuff where they're like, oh, but I've been told to not do that. I've been raised by energy types. I've been raised by types that are not manifestors. They didn't know about that, or they didn't have that innate understanding. So I have been keeping myself small the entire time. And I find it to be just as tragic and as sad for a manifestor to not be in their power as it is for a projector to be in the wrong aura dynamics, right? It's not like, oh, but ours is worse. It's every type has their own stuff to work with.
Okay, that's actually good to hear. I'm sorry
Like
to
at least we're all
sorry, not
miserable.
sorry. You know what I mean? It's like it's not only us having our kind of a course on us.
Certainly.
It's everybody.
And even energy types as well. I just want to touch on that because I do work with lots of manifesting generators and generators. And we always say like, oh, they have the world built for them and all of that, but they have their stuff as well. Like, you know, it's really all of us. Yeah.
So if we go back for a second on projectors again, and within our strategy or the way how we utilize our opportunities, it is to wait for the invitation, as I have learned. So can you elaborate, please, on those holy invitations, I'm calling them? This is the part that I was struggling the most with. So
Mm,
I would love you to present the invitations a little bit about to us.
sure. So if we go back to what we said before with the auric focus, right? Where do you
Focus
direct
your
that
energy.
arrow?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tool that has been given to us by the system is to not just sort of willy-nilly go, oh, I guess over here is fine, but to wait for someone to actually invite it, to wait for someone to put up their hand and say, hey, over here, please, I'm ready. I actually want this. And then you go in that direction if that's correct for you. So that's the idea of the invitation.
And how do we recognize those invitations? Do you think there is such a thing as a right or the wrong one?
I do think there is such a thing as a right or wrong one, and that's where the next layer of human design comes in, which is authority. So if you guys, Maria's she said she put the link on the episode. So if you look up your chart, it's going to say authority and it's going to say a little word next to it. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that, because I know sometimes the human design lingo is a little bit, ugh, if you don't know anything, it can be a little bit um, you can feel excluded from this conversation. So I just try to break it down. And authority is really just a word for inner knowing, inner GPS is what I like to call it. So in terms of right or wrong invitations, you want to sort of filter that through your inner knowing, through your inner authority to determine whether it's right or wrong. Because, of course, many different people can put up their hand and say, hey, over here, please. And then you still have to go because it's you living your life. It's you dealing with the ramifications. You have to decide, am I going to go there? Is this what I want?
Mm.
And then sometimes you'll still, get it maybe wrong. And you'll know once it gets painful enough. I think we've all had that experience. Um, but I would say that as much as possible, use that information if you've ever gone in a wrong direction or perceived wrong direction, just use it as information rather than evidence to beat yourself up. Because, like, for me, I'm really moving away from the idea of perfection and doing it all right 100% of the time and having it all together and just like the right invitation, right? Like the notion that if we're just acting perfectly and acting in absolute accordance with our design and our aura, that we can control our fate or that we can control some kind of outcome, that I do not believe.
Wow.
So,
I love that you mentioned that because I have been a perfectionist for my whole
mm,
life. And I don't know if it was written in the stars or something that at some point it started to change. Right now, I'm just like, yes, I'm trying to keep standards, but not as much as I used to. For example, in the previous times for some preparations, I would just spend time and time and time doing it, prepping it, making it perfect. And even when I would reach whatever goal, quote
mhm.
unquote, I did, it was just never perfect enough. So it could be the entire life, me doing something, trying to make it as a perfection, and there is no such a thing.
And then you deal with it, right? Like I was re-listening to a book called The Wisdom of No Escape. I think it was my first book this year. And she says how we just love the idea of controlling things, but in her paradigm of understanding, she says things come together and things fall apart. Like that's just life, right? There's no, oh, but if I'd only done it better, then things wouldn't have fallen apart. Like I think that's so important. And it's really something I think about a lot. It's one of my main intentions right now to cultivate that grace to deal with that. And of course, to use something like the human design system to, yes, for sure, put myself at an advantage, put myself in situations that work for me, that work for my aura. Because, of course, we don't need to be making things harder on ourselves. We've been doing that our whole life. That's not it. But in the end, I think we're human. We make mistakes, if that's what we want to call it. And there's also fate. There's unforeseen circumstances, like you were saying, right? You can spend 5,000 years perfecting your thing, and then there's an unforeseen circumstance and everything falls apart. And it's not your fault. But so I'm really not subscribing to the idea of if I only adhere to the system 100% and I do it perfectly and I wait for the perfect invitation and then I perfectly filter it through my authority and then everything, then my life will be great, because I don't think that's how it works. It's not something that I would ever want to promote, because that's not my place or anyone's place to make that sort of claim. So I try to give that extra piece when when I talk about something such as right or wrong, because in the end, we can only live our lives. I hope that was, I
Love it.
hope that
Love
comes
it. This
across.
is actually amazing introduction to the question that I'm wondering a lot about, which is, do you agree or do you think that the idea that an invitation isn't always somebody literally inviting you somewhere, but sometimes it can be even a redirection from quote unquote higher forces guiding you exactly where you need to be?
What do you think?
Well, I had both. I
Mhm.
had literal invitations, and I had some things that maybe somebody would label as, terrible experience. And I guess it depends on just your point of view or on whatever is happening to you. So, for
Mhm.
example, those symptoms of a burnout, I was literally in a position where I did not care anymore. Where would I end up?
Yeah.
And I really think I was blessed at that moment, because I think I had a good background in me just really, really letting go of anything and
Mhm.
trusting exactly what you were just saying, that I will end up where I need to be. But I don't think I'm not trying to put myself in a higher position or something, but I really think you have to have kind of a background to be in that position, because this could have had
Consequences.
consequences, exactly. So I really, really honestly and wholeheartedly let go of everything, and I trusted whatever has to happen, it will be for my benefit. And somebody could have had a point of view of, this is terrible, everything is going wrong, I put so much effort in my career and now look at where I am, etc., etc. You know what I mean? So I had both. I had literal invitations, and I'm actually a person who is quite literal in thinking.
Mhm.
But looking back, I also had those so-called redirections, because with this experience that I had, I'm now in this new industry to me, retreats and well-being, and I'm seeing myself thriving. So
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm really happy to hear. I mean, that's what I was saying with the trajectory from bitterness to success, right? Or from exhaustion to success. I'm really happy to hear that you're finding yourself on that path.
thank you. Thank
Mm.
you.
I think everyone needs to figure it out for themselves how they want to interpret that, because, again, as I said before, you alone are going to live your life and live with the ramifications of your actions and your belief system that is driving you to those actions, right? Having said that, I personally am more of a purist, and I find that I like to have a clear distinction between this is an invitation and this is, I completely also believe in like signs from the universe, or, just sort of a path sort of being laid out in front of you, or when you're veering too much off a path, for signs to pop up. That's what I personally believe. I would not classify those as invitations, however. That to me is a different thing. So I find that things get a bit muddled once we go, oh, but the invitation came to me in a dream, or like, this person may not actually have invited me, but I know they want to, they're just shy, or, like we start making up these stories.
Yeah.
So I tend to err on the side of being a bit more conservative with that. But hey, anyone is free to do as they please. And that also doesn't mean that I only ever make a move when there's been like an explicit written invitation in my mailbox. I sometimes also go like, stuff it, I'm gonna do it. But I do it in the full awareness of, hey, this is going to be 50-50. I might not end up liking how this goes for me, but for me, I know I have the capacity to deal with that. And in the end, I just treat it as information.
Thank you for sharing this, because one of my questions that I don't think I even put on my list was, do you think we should only act when there is invitation, or we can also take action on our own terms? And I think you just answered that
Oh,
question.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
I would never want anyone to feel limited by an external system in this way. I think that's very dangerous, and not something that I would promote. So I think you have to do what works for you. And if a system helps you and guides you and provides benefit and merit, wonderful. But it should never be placed above what you want to do. So again, as I said before, like I sometimes will go, whatever, I'm gonna go ahead. But to me, again, it's more about, do I have the capacity to deal with this going wrong? Do I have the capacity to be disappointed? Can I deal with things going really sideways here? And in most cases, it's a yes. So I know that I can handle it. And then, because that's life again, right? Like no system is gonna save you from that.
Exactly. Okay, Nadia, here is the biggest question of all. This is $1 million
Oh,
question. Are you ready?
what is it? It's what?
It's $1 million question.
Okay, I am ready. Let me have another shot of whiskey. No, I'm just kidding. I drink. Okay.
Why, oh, why do projectors often live like generators? And is there a way we can stop that? I mean, this was one of my biggest issues, and I do sometimes still catch myself acting as a generator and
Mhm.
not giving myself enough permission to slow down and rest as projectors need to. So I would love to hear your perspective. Like, why do we keep on acting as we were generators and we're not?
I think it just makes sense when we look at the numbers. Let's look at the numbers, guys. It's as we said before, we've got the 70% that have defined cycles that are generators and manifesting generators. It's going to be sheer peer pressure. It's going to be role modeling. It's going to be the 70% doing their thing as they should, and the other 30 thinking, okay, well, I guess that's how it's done. Then let me conform. And then we do for a long time, for as long as we can, until it gets too painful to continue. And that's usually when my clients come to find me. And one of the merits, or one of the main merits that I see in the human design system for projectors, is to even introduce that notion and that concept that there is another way, and you're not wrong for craving and desiring and needing another way. Because again, I'll tell you, most of my clients have that deep desire, but prior to finding human design, there wasn't ever something like that concept that wasn't even on their radar as a thing that is actually okay, as something that's actually acceptable, or something they actually deserve that they could give to themselves or design for themselves. So that permission piece that the system gives you is huge, and is at the start of that journey. And then from then on, depending on your status quo, there will have to be some decisions and some changes about the way you show up, maybe the company you keep, maybe the things you say yes to, the boundaries you put in place and enforce. it differs from person to person, but in my experience and in my own life and with my clients, the more that you can click into that template, the better it feels and the more natural it feels and the easier it gets. So to the degree where a few years of committed experimentation this is the point that I'm at right now, the pain of overriding myself is bigger to me than the pain of, say, potentially having a tough conversation, or the pain of setting a boundary and being misunderstood as a result, or the pain of being disliked. Do you know what I mean? Like,
For sure. Wow. I
I,
love that you're talking about that. And honestly, my own transition from acting like a generator, and I'm being honest and saying that I can still sometimes catch myself acting like one.
of course, it's so natural. Yeah.
But I feel like my transition was first and foremost even understanding, hey, there are different human designs.
Yeah.
And we're not supposed to be acting the same because this is just not what works for us. That was the first one. And then I love that you're mentioning boundaries because for me, that's for sure also in the category of me transitioning and
Mhm.
acting more as a projector, just protecting what feels right for me and what doesn't, and just stop being in the position where I used to be all the time, which is people pleasing. So
Yeah.
these were my biggest transitioning parts, and I hope I will just enter the role of a projector and embrace it 100% because as I said, I'm still kind of going back and forth, sometimes not even being
Yeah.
aware of it. Um,
It's okay. It's not like no one's keeping score. No one's, there's no scoreboard. You're just learning and experimenting and doing your best. And again, it will get painful at some point if you're going too far in one direction. And there's going to be a part of you that's like, wait a minute, no. And then you'll come back. My teacher always said this. He's like, oh, no, now I forgot how he says it. But I think he says, you can't you forget until you remember, or something like that. Like you can't realize you forgot until you remember. And then when you remember, you remember. So then you do better, right? So,
And honestly, everything that I learned about projectors, and the aura and us sometimes feeling exhausted, mostly for me, it was by being exposed to so many people and not understanding how to just make myself feel better and feel aligned and stuff like that. It reminded me a lot of introverts. Would you say all the introverted people are projectors and vice versa, or there is no link in between?
hmm, no link as to my understanding. In fact, in my understanding, personality has very, very little to do with human design. It's not a framework that tells you personality traits per se. It's a framework that shows you your underlying aura dynamics. So that is different. And there are very flamboyant, outgoing projectors and audacious projectors and extroverted projectors. And then there are very introverted and shy and quiet manifestors. So I don't like putting limitations on people's personalities like that. Even when I know someone's type, I'm still like, hey, I'm open. Like, show me who you are, surprise me. Like, it gives me zero notion of who they will be. It just gives me understanding of their aura and their tendencies.
Got it. Also, I heard you discuss a lot capacity, our personal capacity. Could you elaborate on what do you mean by that, and how is our capacity defined, and can we influence it? Is this possible to do?
Absolutely. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job, or I wouldn't have as rich a job as I do. I would only be doing strategy. So
Tell us
capacity
about it.
capacity to me is the vessel. So it's the vessel that holds any effort that you put into it. So I make the distinction between conscious and subconscious work. So my work with business strategy, with helping people with their service blueprint, helping people with crafting scalable digital products. That to me is all conscious mind, conscious strategy territory. But then in order for that to land, in order for that person to to be able to actually implement that, sustain that, and go through with that, and be able to receive the successes that the strategy work brings, we have to make sure that the capacity is aligned as well. You can think of it as if you have a very tiny glass and that's your capacity, and then you start pouring in strategy, you're like, oh my God, now I'm gonna, next year I'm gonna really level up my retreats, and you start making these bigger plans for like, oh, this is going to be really like 5-star state of the art, whatever. But the capacity that you have for success, the capacity that you have for boundaries, the capacity that you have for structures is still the same. It's like you're pouring water into that tiny glass. You keep pouring because your plans are that big and your vision is that big, as it should be, but there's nowhere for it to go. And that's where people usually find themselves self-sabotaging, or what they call self-sabotage. I personally don't believe in self-sabotage, because to me, it's just the
Unawareness.
sorry?
Unawareness, probably, right? Like,
Well, it's just the universal fact that you can only sustain what you have the capacity for. So in fact, you're not sabotaging. It's just that you're just at a certain capacity level. And in order for you to get to the next level where you can sustain the strategy, we have to also expand the capacity. So it's like, it's a two-pronged approach. It's like two railroad tracks, and we can't just drive on one railroad track and leave the other wheel behind. We have to go forward with both wheels, kind of thing.
yeah.
So that's even human design, right, to me is conscious understanding and insight, but that's only the start, which is why I personally don't actually offer human design readings, because I like to go beyond insight. I want to look at your chart with you and then go, okay, but what does that mean for you in your real life, coupled with your life experiences, with your associations, with your conditioning, and then do the capacity work together to get you to an empowered place in your business or your interpersonal dynamics, rather than just giving you insight and then sending you on your merry way, but you still don't have the capacity to actually implement it, sustain it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I'm thinking like how this is probably a process and not just one hour thing or 2 hour things. This must be a process, right? Or no?
It's definitely a process, but it depends on where people are at. Like sometimes someone comes in with something very specific and we're so quick. I always I always marvel at the things that we can do in an hour, 2 hours. And then sometimes it takes longer. It depends on the status quo, it depends on the goal, it depends on the gap between the capacity and the strategy. And it also depends, frankly, on sometimes the age of the person and the years that they have spent inside their conditioning. Because the longer you sort of repeat the same patterns, the stronger the patterns get. And I can really see after, doing this for a long time now with hundreds of clients, I can see that people who are a little bit older have it harder.
Yeah.
I hate saying this because I want to say like, no, it's, like same opportunity for anyone, but I can see how it gets trickier with age. So as early as you can start is always best.
And in your work with capacity, are you then only limiting yourself to working with projectors, or that's not the case?
No, I love working with all types, and I always think of my wonderful gens and manifestors and manifesting generators, and I would never, never not want to work with them. And as projectors, we are designed to guide energy types. Like that's kind of the underlying design. So I think that I'm right where I'm needed, but I do have a big focus on projectors because I want to hopefully, I hope that's that's how it's going, contribute something, because after so many years of experience now where, it's not just here's what I learned in this course or here's what I learned in some book, but it's like, no, I've been through this with hundreds of projectors, one-on-one and with students. Here's how that works out in real life. Here's what's been helpful for them. Here's what I've seen move the needle for other projectors with that same profile or with that same center configuration or in that same situation. And that's where I think I can be most helpful because I've got a unique insight. So I do love working with projectors, but I don't foresee myself ever limiting myself to only one type.
Got it. But then also, while working with capacity, do you still wonder and need to know what human design they are?
Yes.
Or oh yes. Okay.
Oh, yes. I look at it. I look at every single client's human design. Like I have a very extensive preparation before I even hop on the first call. Like before we even talk for the first time, I will really prepare extensively. Because I want to know how to work with someone and I would never want to condition someone further. Like I want to help them get back to their true nature rather than, condition them away from that. So that's where it's really helpful. Even when someone finds me specifically for business strategy or capacity, they're not interested in human design. I completely respect that. And I still ask them to submit their information so that I can look it up. And of course, if someone doesn't want to share that, of course, although that's never been the case until now, but of course, if someone doesn't want to share that with me, that's fine as well. And I will respect that. But I certainly prefer looking at it.
Oh my God, now I'm interested and I'm wondering like, is it usually a few hours or to start with, right? Is it 1 hour? Is it few hours?
Well,
Uh,
so I can tell you how my service setup goes. So I do an intro session, and that's actually the only thing that anyone can book on my site. So it's a single hour, and you have to choose either between strategy or capacity. Or if you're a projector, you can choose between projector coaching or projector business coaching. But in the end, it's still the same distinction between, are we looking more at like your business structures and the way you're showing up, the way you're communicating, the way you're marketing? That to me is all strategy. Or are we looking at that vessel? Are we looking at that part of you that's like, here's my big goal, but I'm not doing the things I should be doing. I want to be more visible, but I'm also scared. I'm not talking about my business openly because I'm terrified. Or whenever I hit a certain income, I get really terrified and then I just shut down and I can't seem to overcome this revenue ceiling, things like that. That is capacity. So that's the first decision you make. And then we meet for 1 hour. And then sometimes we figure it out in that hour, although that's rare, unless, again, someone has a very, very clear understanding of what it is they need and their system really takes to it super quickly. Um, and then afterwards, I offer sessions of packages of 5 or 8. Usually 5 is for one specific focus. So if we just do strategy or capacity, and if someone wants both, which I also love to do because it's nice to, I think it's really nice for the client to have one person who understands both their strategy and their capacity and their human design. So it's actually not just both. Um, because then it's not like, oh, I have a business coach over here, but this person doesn't understand my human design. And then I have like someone who helps me with my subconscious stuff, but this person doesn't understand my business. It's like I'm one person who has the overview of all of that. So if we do a mix, I usually prefer to do 8 sessions because it allows us to kind of go back and forth. Like I said, with the railroad tracks, like we go forward with one wheel and then we go with the next so that we're always in accordance.
wow.
And that's how I like to do it. It's a very well thought out service blueprint, I
It
can tell
sounds
you.
like that, definitely.
That's what I've seen work the best and how I also prefer to work because I like to go deep with someone rather than sort of just doing, you know, I'm not really the type who just wants to do like readings with a new person every day. Like I'm invested in my clients' businesses and lives. I'm like, oh my God, this one has a launch this week. Like I have it in my personal calendar. I'm like, launch of
No wonder projector.
yes, of course. Because I'm once I work with someone, I'm in. I'm like, I'm cheering this person on years beyond even working together. I'm still like, oh my God. Or, I get emails from people I've worked with years ago, and they're like, Nadia, remember this thing we said? I just did it, or I just hit this
Oh,
goal. And
so nice.
it's, I mean, wow, what a wonderful job that
You
I,
created for
yes.
yourself.
Exactly. I was just going to say, yeah, that I made up because it didn't exist. I literally made it
Love it. Oh my
happen.
God. I'm so happy to hear that and to just know where you are. I admire when people really make jobs for themselves, create them for themselves.
As you're doing, right? As you're doing yourself as well.
I guess so. Wow. Thank
I
you
think so, Maria.
for reflecting that back to me.
Yeah,
I
I
need
think
some more mirrors sometimes.
you can start thinking of yourself as someone like that because it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, and
Thank
not for nothing because you've been through something, as we say, right? It's gotten too so painful that you needed to redesign, and it sounds like that's exactly what you've been doing for yourself. And I know that's not easy, and it takes so much, and I think that is going to benefit you and your customers and your clients for years to come because you're not just guiding or teaching or supporting people from a place of, whatever, but like you've been through a transformation yourself. And I just think that makes you trustworthy and it makes you someone worth seeking out.
Wow, thank you so much for reflecting that back to me because I really sometimes need to just stop and remind myself where
Yeah,
I've been and where am I now. So thank you really very much.
my pleasure.
And of course, I could really talk about this forever, projectors especially. But to wrap it all up, dear Nadia, what would you say to anybody listening? And how would you summarize? Why is it good for anyone to have the understanding of their human design, wherever it might be?
Mhm. I think the permission piece that we talked about is really big. So there are going to be things that you don't even know about yourself, or that maybe you know at some level in some little corner, but you've never given yourself permission to explore that because it's always been too weird or too quirky, or your family members didn't do it that way, but you're the only one. And to have that, to see that reflected somewhere that's external and that's sort of an objective thing. And for that to give you that piece of, hey, maybe this is something that's okay for me to have or to be this way, and to explore and to lean into it a little more and to be playful with it. I think that's one of the main things that anyone can benefit from.
Thank you
Mm.
so much for sharing it, and thank you so much for wrapping it up so beautifully.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for joining me. I mean, you were mentioning earlier, and I didn't want to interrupt you, that you are also choosing who you're going to say yes or no to.
Yes.
So I'm honored that you said yes to me.
Yes.
Really, I'm very, very touched by that and honored. And really, to anybody interested in getting to know more about Nadia, I invite you to find her on Instagram under Nadia Gabrielle, or her additional account that we mentioned, Projectors Invited. And for sure, I would invite you to subscribe to her newsletter, as they are always just so much fun and those gems that you actually want to be receiving in your mailbox. So I will add Nadia's account as well to the description box of this podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to everybody listening, and see you soon in another episode. Wishing you the most beautiful purple aura.